Ladies and gentlemen, it's 7 o'clock. Welcome to Westminster's Cabinet. It's very nice to see as many members of the public here as we have. It's not so on every topic that we discuss, but I think we know why this is.
Can't hear.
Well, I'm using a microphone. I can shout at it if that would make it better.
I'm not letting you hear them.
Is that audible at the back?
No.
It's still very poor. Perhaps you should stand. It would be.
Well, if I stand, I'm further away from the microphone. I can only. That's about as far as I can go. Is there anybody with a volume switch? There is. There's only. If I keep speaking, does that make it better? That sounds a lot louder.
That's much better.
Very good. Okay. And does that switch? Does that turn everybody up by the same token? Good. I have apologies from councillors Davis, Glantz and Astaire. Declarations of interest. Are there any interests to be declared by any members or officers on any of the items on the agenda? Minutes. Can I have your approval to the minutes of the meeting held on the 27th of June?
Agree.
Okay. The parking policy review, Rosemarie MacQueen is for those who don't know, is the strategic director of the built environment and is the officer responsible for the preparation of the recommendations that are before us. Rosemary.
Thank you, Chairman. Because this is obviously a very important and obviously, as we can see from the Council Chamber tonight, a very interesting paper, I would like to just make some summary points before we move to the report itself, and also to update those people who are here tonight of further consultation responses that have been received over the weekend. The consultation period obviously closed a little while ago, but as we do normally, try to take on board any content, any comments that have been made. That's what we're intending to do tonight. And I will therefore make reference to some additional papers which both Cabinet members here but also people in the audience will have access to. Just so that the City of Westminster, as most of us will recognise, is a particularly unique environment, as is often said in various meetings. We have to perfect the balance of managing, shaping and responding to a sometimes conflicting needs of being both a global city, while at the same time for other people being a hometown. We acknowledge that it's one of the most recognised places in the world and are proud of that. It is at the heart of London as a capital city. It's the seat of government and monarchy, home to many government departments, law courts. It's a major office and business centre for employment. It has a range of places of worship. It has many embassies. Most of the West End theatres are here. It has many museums, an extraordinary density of bars, restaurants, clubs and other entertainment venues. It also hosts hotels, universities and colleges. It's a global retail destination and it contains many transport termini, major transport termini. At the same time, it is, as we said, a hometown, so there are many residential homes and an extraordinarily vibrant residential community live throughout and right into the heart of this city. We have a residential population of about 230,000 upwards, which swells to over 1 million in terms of how we host people during every day because of the considerable influx of visitors from both home and abroad. And in consequence of that, we have intense pressure on transport and the parking networks that the Council is responsible for. And those kind of pressures are intense. In some instances, they appear overwhelming to the city, and they also are problematic in terms of the city's character and its future development, in terms of things like protecting the environment, in terms of needing to develop the economy, and to also set the highest possible standards for improving our public realm and also our green environment. Our last parking review was in 2001, and much has changed since then. Traffic levels across central London have continued to increase. Air quality continues to decline, and this is mainly attributed to emissions from road transport. There's been increased use and substantial improvement of the London bus network, and there is now 100% low-floor bus accessibility in central London. And there is much planned, as we know, to improve the underground, although that can be problematic in itself, but underground improvements, including accessibility, are ongoing. We have increased cycling and walking provision. We have now the bicycle hire scheme, the Berkeley Bicycle Hire Scheme, which is being extended. We have a congestion charge scheme that covers much of central Westminster. We have a demand for parking that is increased significantly in most areas. The residential employment and economic development across the city of Westminster, I'm glad to say, continues to grow, which is what we want. But in terms of parking control, at the same time, in terms of improvements, there have been advantages. We now have user information technology. We have such things as cashless parking. We have pay by phone, and we also have a Westminster Car Club, and also electronic charging and electronic vehicles. So all of those are changes, quite dramatic changes, that have taken place since the last review in 2001. So in 2010-11, the council really needed to recognise and review what we had achieved to date, but also in terms of reviewing how parking and transport and traffic moves across the city and through the city, we needed to look at our evidence base. And in order to look at changes in policy as anywhere else, one needs to have a very robust evidence base, and that's what we've attempted to achieve. And that evidence base is partly to look at what pressures we have now on our highways, on our network, and also the pressures on and off-street parking provision, because those are duties and responsibilities that the council has under various pieces of legislation. We also have to make recommendations in terms of how to achieve improvements and also ameliorate some of those pressures that residents and also the economy is living with. Those particular pressures are very much emphasised in the West End. It's more intense there, the pressure, than in comparison to other parts of the city. We have unrestricted parking in those areas at night and at weekends, and that has increasingly stifled the council's ability to manage its network. We all rely on doorstep deliveries, and our businesses within Westminster also rely on those, and they need improved accessibility for the delivery vans that service those businesses and residences. And also, Westminster is a particularly interesting and complicated mosaic of communities where residents are rather different to some other parts of the country, and there are also rather contrasting needs for parking here than there are in many, many towns and cities across the country. So we have communities that are crying out for visitor parking schemes, but we also have residents who oppose those visitor parking schemes. So again, complicated issues to be resolved just within one small area such as that. So we feel as officers that the council will wish to continue its measured development of future transport solutions. We know that, for example, over the course of the end of last week, the European Commission was saying something about 2050 in terms of wanting to see only electronic vehicles within the heart of a capital city. So some of the policies that we're looking at tonight are things that will be constantly reviewed as we move towards some of those quite challenging targets which are there for the future. We also have a car club that's developing, and we also have the development of freight consolidation schemes which are helping in the delivery of goods and services within the city. So those are the kind of pressures that the City Council is facing, and where the report that is before you tonight is coming to a conclusion in terms of the recommendations. There are 9 proposed policies put forward. These draft policies were looked at and agreed by Cabinet to go out to consultation in May of this year, and since that period of time there has been further intense discussion and consultation being carried out with regard to those particular proposals. Before we turn to the report, I would just like to give a quick update in terms of understanding some extra paperwork that's been handed around. I thought it would be useful if you were able just to see the Westminster's Transport Network profile of 2011, which is a single sheet of paper, which says something which again describes something about the unique nature of Westminster. You will not find another city within the UK that has the kind of provision of public transport opportunities that you have within Westminster. And so the policies that we have developed are set within the context of what we see before us there. And I'm not going to go through that in any further detail, but just as further background information. There are two additional appendices. They are marked Additional Appendix 1 and Additional Appendix 2. I'm sorry, we have been working, as you can see, right up almost to the last minute in preparation for this. It might have been better if I had numbered them slightly different, and I would like to take the opportunity in terms of an audit trail of information to do that now, if that could be taken note of by the committee clerk. Additional Appendix 1 I would like to call 2H, and Additional Appendix 2 I would like to call 2G. And the reason for that is that they are to be inserted in due course in terms of the appendices that you have as part of your report. Appendix 2 is the detailed submissions that have been received since the Stage 1 consultation. And what we have here is a summary of the latest consultation responses that we have received since the 29th of July up until the 1st of August, so in a sense hot off the press. 2G, which is down as Appendix 2 in your bundle, is a list of additional responses received by letter and email over that period. At the moment, we have listed as bullets the names and addresses of people, and officers have done a very quick scan of the content of those letters. And we do not see anything there at the moment which would cause us to change the recommendations that we are making. But further to the individual responses, there are also responses in the form of petitions. And there are, and in the second page, which second set of papers, which is 2H, you have a summary of petitions that have been received. The first one that is mentioned there is from Central London churches, and you will see a list alongside of which is the number of signatures for those churches. I'm afraid to say it's slightly complicated because if it's a named church that's within Westminster, we've been able to put that. So, for example, on that first page, you've got the United Welsh Church in Central London, you've got St George's, St Martin, Grosvenor Chapel, etc., which are in Westminster, and alongside on the right-hand side the number of signatories. But we have also received facsimile petitions where the person who has sent us the comments have not put the name of the church on top of them. So there is an example, if I can find it there, I can't immediately find it, but there is one, for example, from a pastor who has an address of a church in Slough, and as far as I can see from the postal code, all the postal codes are from outside London. Now, it's not clear whether he runs a service in central London or whether, in fact, it was a petition that was given out to a church outside London asking for a comment on the introduction of parking charges within Westminster. And because of the short time that officers have had to look at that, we haven't been able to give us any further detail. But you will see that there are a number of signatories there, totaling 7,223, who are objecting to the introduction of Sunday parking as related in that standard petition format that's on the front page. The second additional petition material comes from the National Casino Industry Forum, and we have 442 signatories to that. Again, the format of the objection is the same as the earlier petition, which is mentioned already in the earlier pack. So it's an objection to extension of parking hours into the evening on behalf of casino employees who obviously work through the night. The third additional petition is from the Musicians' Union. It doesn't actually tell us how many people have responded, but it relates to the fact that they asked their members 6 questions, and there are responses there, again, objecting to the extension of paid for parking in the evening. The fourth petition, which actually arrived today, and it may well be that one of the councillors here will be speaking to it, is from the Marylebone Traders. Marylebone Traders, it's a 300 signature petition, and they are objecting on the grounds of the impact on the retail industry within the Marylebone area. And I'm sorry to keep dodging about, but in 2G you will see on the second page the detail of what they have said in relation to the Marylebone Traders. I'm sorry, I've misdirected you there. I will come back to, oh no, sorry, it's in front of me here. The enclosed petition is drawn up to say that the proposals are unnecessary, will discourage shopping public from visiting the area of Marylebone and will be damaging to our business. So that's the content of the Marylebone Traders. So those are the extra responses that we've had outside, obviously, the consultation deadline, but we have tried our best to make sure that you are aware of their responses. Turning back to the Cabinet report itself, I'm well aware that you have all had the opportunity to and have been deeply immersed in this, as you have been in May, because there have been many comments and questions going backwards and forwards between many Cabinet members. The recommendations are laid out on pages 3, 4 and 5. They are very close to the recommendations that were put forward as draft recommendations in May, but with some small nuances to them in relation to, for example, the recommendation 1, which is to extend on an experimental basis for 18 months street parking controls in E and G. We had originally for that, and also for recommendation 2, to suggest that residents should be able to park on yellow lines as well as blue and white badge holders because of legal advice that we have received in relation to equalities. It was considered that this was not an appropriate recommendation to make. It is a recommendation that can be made safely in relation to positive discrimination for disabled groups, for blue and white badge holders to be able to park on yellow lines, and so we have made that variation there. The rest of the recommendations are almost what they were in May, and obviously I'm sure in terms of questions more will come up later. In terms of the report, section 5, which starts on page 7, goes through the whole process of consultation that has been carried out. There have been a series of focus groups, there have been forums, there have been public meetings, and there have been individual meetings that have been held by the Cabinet member with particular interest groups during that period, discussing what the policy's impact would be, and listening to the comments that have been made by those various interest groups. Section 6 actually goes through some of the more detailed consultation responses that we had, where questions were raised about the validity of the evidence base, the way that data collection had occurred, and in relation to the consultants' report, Buchanan's, who looked at parking occupancy surveys, comparing the current parking with parking at the previous time that a parking survey was done, also looking at the automatic traffic counts that had been done, and then section 7 gets us into consideration and analysis of the detailed responses that we have received. We then, because you have all had the opportunity to read and look at those, the sections go through for each of the recommendations the most important and salient points that consultees brought forward in relation to the introduction of paid parking in the evening hours, paid parking on Sundays, in relation to areas where there was a lot less interest, perhaps, in terms of taxi hubs, in terms of shared parking for servicing, in terms of electric vehicles, in terms of review of visitor parking. So the overwhelming interest was obviously, I think, in policies 1 and 2, and the detailed responses to the main queries that were made that were salient are contained within that section 7. There has also been, in section 9, there was a parking task group set up, which we had a presentation, or we had a very interesting review of that by the chairman, Councillor Alan Bradley, looking at everything from the methodology, from the detailed way that the surveys were carried out, and also looking across the piece at what was happening elsewhere, either both internationally but also within the UK, because we had the services of Nick Lester, who is an expert in the field of parking. The further sections are sections that you expect to see in any report, which are to do with financial and legal implications. Obviously, City Solicitor is here to talk about those. Equality implications, I would just like to say something about that. There is an equality impact assessment, which is also contained as a detailed report within your appendices. We asked the Council's experts in terms of equalities to look particularly at the impact on certain groups, which were mainly were particularly disabled groups, groups of people, for example, lone workers, female workers, particularly from the casino and other entertainment industries, who work irregular shifts, and also faith communities. So making sure that the policies that we were putting forward complied with the equalities legislation that is in place at the moment. That doesn't mean to say that you can only put forward policies which have no impact at all in terms of equalities. It means that you've actually got to make sure that you have a justified reason for doing something if there is an inequitable response to the bringing in of a policy. You've got to have, in a sense, justification for the wider well-being of the City Council's area. And in terms of the equality assessment, we feel that we have been able to balance the various competing needs that there are. And the final sections of the report just deal with things like health and well-being, crime and disorder, which I'm not, in a sense, just brushing them aside. All of those have been looked at in detail and are in that section of the report, starting in section 7, in detail, to make sure that we have complied with the various legislation and any comments that have been brought through in relation to that. So the recommendations are before you to debate and comment on.
Thank you very much, Rosemary. May I say at this point, I sort of congratulate you and your team for the thorough, comprehensive and professional way in which this piece of research and these has been conducted. The recommendations that come from it have been framed, as evidenced by your comprehensive introduction just now. I now call Cllr Lee Rowley, who is the Cabinet member responsible for this area, to speak to the recommendations.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to echo what Colin said. First off, to thank Rosemary and Hugh and Barry for all the work they've done over the last 12 months nearly on this report since I've been involved. We can disagree potentially with some of the recommendations in the report, or people who read the report can disagree with some of those recommendations, but I think that I hope that everybody would agree that officers have spent an enormous amount of time in terms of putting these together and going through it in a comprehensive and evaluative manner, and I'd like to put on record my thanks to them. I think the sheer fact that I've never had a report in 5 years on the council where it couldn't go through my door when it was delivered to me a few weeks ago is probably indicative of the amount of work that's gone in over weekends, in the evenings and the like, along with the responses from the public, and so my thanks again. I would also like to thank everybody involved who has commented on the parking policy review, either in the December questionnaire, the November to January questionnaire, or in the May to June consultation, which was extended right up, as you've heard, until 5 p.m. this evening in order to obtain as many comments and views from as many people as we possibly can. We're very grateful for all the time that you have taken, including those people who are here tonight and have taken time out of their schedules to come here. It's not something which I know many of you want to be here for, and I know you probably have much better things to do on a Monday evening than this, and so I am very grateful for your willingness to come and also your willingness to get involved. I think it shows, the sheer number of people here, just how much consultation has been done over the past 12 months. And I thought that I'd get a ruse from that. Whether we like it or not, the reality is that we have run 2 non-statutory consultations on this proposals, and we've done that deliberately. We've done that because we wanted to understand what you were saying, and the sheer fact that you're here tonight is indicative of the fact that you have responded to that, and we are very grateful. As I say, we have run focus groups, we have put questionnaires in libraries, they've gone out to residents, to old age pensioners' homes. We ran a parking summit on the 1st of June, which was incredibly well attended by 60 people. We went to 12 public meetings around the city with area forums and spoke to many, many individuals. I've had individual meetings with every single person who has asked me for meetings, and I've also rung a number of people who've asked me to ring them about this. The St George's Church, Hanover Square, was kind enough to hold a public meeting a number of weeks ago, which I attended, and I was grateful for everybody who came to that. A double-page spread has gone through the letterboxes of every single resident within Westminster in the April edition of the Westminster Reporter. We have sent 90,000 emails to residents, we have sent several thousand emails to businesses, and we've sent a number of 1,000 emails to stakeholders. We have sent emails on 3 separate occasions to the Faith Exchange, which I believe has 350 people on that mailing list. It's been on Westminster's websites on numerous occasions, and other websites such as NHS Westminster, I believe it was on their intranet. And we've had a task group which was well attended by many of my colleagues who've met on 7 separate occasions over the course of the last year. And I hope that that shows and demonstrates that Westminster has tried to engage with residents. And I understand that there are residents and businesses and visitors and people with interest in this who feel that we haven't gone far enough. But I do hope that what we've just demonstrated and what I've had the ability to talk to people about when I've had the chance to meet them is that we have gone a great deal of the way down to trying to engage people, and that's one of the reasons why there are so many people here tonight. I'd also like to just point out the fact that the council took a very definite decision at the beginning of this process to try and base what we're doing here on evidence, on an objective assessment of what is happening on the streets. Now, there is always a judgment call to be made in how much evidence you gather, and there's always a judgment call to be made in the methodology by which you gather that evidence. But the council has attempted to gather evidence which allows people to have that discussion, which ensures that people do not simply rely on anecdote or what happened yesterday or what happened to their granny last Friday in terms of what's happening with the city, but actually looks on an objective basis with information collected about what is going out there on our streets. I welcome the recommendations that have been put forward by officers. I think it is many hundreds of hours of work on the part of officers and many hundreds of hours of work on the part of people who've wanted to get involved with this process. Having considered the recommendations in detail, both during the consultation process and when this report was published a week ago last Friday, for everybody to read and to look through and to digest. I do have a number of suggestions, however, to my colleagues about how to change these recommendations, given some of the information which we've received in the recent time. If I could go through those recommendations, those suggestions, I would welcome colleagues' views on that. With regards to policy 1, which is the proposal to extend controlled hours in the evenings, I understand the rationale of why officers proposed that residents were able to continue to park during the proposed extended hours of control, i.e. between 6:30 and midnight, on those bays without charge. However, I think having considered having considered that in the round, I think it's important that we ensure there are as many parking spaces as possible for visitors to come and access the city by cars. And I think in this instance we may consider removing that in order to strike that balance appropriately. And so, to be clear, I am proposing deleting the words "be extended" to the whole of the extended time period, i.e. 17:30 to midnight, the final part of the final sentence. With regards to, and I'm sorry to be dotting around, with regards to policy proposal 6, which is the visitor parking permit scheme in Abbey Road, Queen's Park and Regent's Park, officers have proposed that the first trial undertaken with regards to a visitor parking scheme, something which I very much welcome, is undertaken in the Abbey Road ward. I would suggest that we delete reference to the Abbey Road ward in order to allow us to take into account the views of residents across the city to decide where it is appropriate to run that trial. So, to be clear, I would suggest that the proposal is amended to a visitor parking scheme in selected streets in a ward to be chosen, or whatever is the a ward to be determined at a later date. And I'll take officer's advice on how best to structure that change if it is agreed by colleagues. And then thirdly, I would like to come to policy proposal 2, which is the proposal to extend controlled hours on a Sunday. I would propose the first change to this would be similar to the proposal on policy proposal 1, and that is to delete the words "be extended" to throughout the hours of control, i.e. 12 noon to 18:30. I would also, having had regard to the evidence base set out in the report and to the Cabinet report which came before us in May, also the nature and demand for parking facilities on a Sunday, and the responses received to the consultation over the last few weeks with regards to introducing parking controls on a Sunday, whilst recognising that the City Council has a duty to secure the expeditious movement of traffic and to secure suitable and adequate parking provision within the city. I would also suggest that we amend the hours of control on the Sunday referred to in this recommendation to be 1 p.m. to 6 p.m. rather than 12 noon to 6:30 p.m. With regard, I would welcome colleagues' views on the proposals which I have made with regards to changes of these recommendations. This has been a long process. This has been something which, as I say, both officers and the community have been very good in getting involved with. I'm grateful to all of those for doing that. I hope that the suggested changes, in my view, will be helpful in ensuring that these policies are introduced appropriately in the city, and I look forward to the debate this evening.
Thank you very much, Lee. Can I ask a question at this point of the city solicitor? By implication, a report of this kind coming to Cabinet has been vetted by the city solicitor as being that what we're doing is legal and so on. The Cabinet member has now made some additional suggestions in relation to that. Does your opinion that this is a legal set of steps apply to those amended recommendations that the Cabinet members just put? In other words, are you satisfied that those are just as legal as everything else in the report?
Yes, obviously, in order to be lawful, what the council does must be consistent with its statutory powers. We must be exercising those powers for a proper purpose. We must take into account the considerations that are relevant and disregard the considerations that are irrelevant. Certainly don't see any problem with any of those proposed amendments, subject to one point I'll come to in a minute. In relation to the amended hours on Sundays, obviously the recommendations that the officers have made are based on the officer assessment of what the evidence justifies, having considered the response to consultation, and I don't know whether Cllr Rowley is able to say anything at any stage about his reasons for the amendment he's proposing, but on the basis that that amendment's proposed, having considered the consultation, the evidence, and in the light of his views about the evidence, what people have said in relation to the proposals in the light of the Council's statutory duties in relation to the provision of adequate and suitable parking, traffic flow, etc. And I don't think there's any problem. The only slightly pedantic point I have relates to the deletion of the words "be extended to" throughout the hours of control in recommendations 2 and 1, and I can't then quite make the recommendations make sense if we just delete those words, but as I understand it, we're deleting the recommendation, the proposal that the current concession whereby residents' parking permit holders are allowed to park free of charge in paid-for bays for the first and last hours of control is extended. Is that right?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Lee, can you give that confirmation that has been suggested? That's the grounds for your amended recommendation.
Yes, I think that the council has put forward an enormous amount of evidence in the last few months, and we've had the opportunity to go through that evidence. And what it shows is that there is a different traffic pattern on a Sunday, where traffic begins to flow into the city later, but then it is significant enough, as we have indicated, to cause the council to bring forward these proposals in order to ensure it's fulfilling its legal duty. And then also there are different periods by when traffic leaves our city, and therefore I think it is appropriate to amend those hours based on that and based on the responses which we have received, taking into account the information which we have received over the past number of months with regards to the consultations that we've undertaken.
Thank you very much. I now call Cllr Harvey Marshal, who, although he is a Deputy Cabinet Member and on this occasion representing Councillor Jonathan Glantz, who's unable to be here this evening, Councillor Marshall is speaking as a ward member on behalf of those people he represents in Marylebone High Street. Councillor Marshall.
Chairman, thank you very much. You rather stole my first two lines of what I was going to say, but can I say first of all how delighted I am that the recommendation has been amended in terms of the hours on Sundays. I think the ability to listen to representations and to take due cognizance of those is extremely important, and this committee hopefully will go down the route of the recommendation by the Cabinet Member for parking. I must say that I prepared a fairly long speech in expectation of something else being recommended, so I'm a bit thrown now. All I can do is urge my colleagues, as you quite rightly said, the Marylebone High Street member, and also the many people who've written to me, telephoned me, stopped me in the street and all sorts of places that I won't go into, just to say how much they felt that our city would be very much influenced in a wrong way if we were to adopt the previous hours, and therefore I think that the city will gain an enormous benefit in many directions from what is proposed, and the hours will permit the city to continue as the capital city of this country and all of that entails. So, Chairman, I would fully support all of the recommendations I've put to you tonight, and particularly the amendments that have also been put to you by Cllr Lee Rowley. And can I just say that I have given Cllr Rowley quite a hard time over the last few weeks and months about this, and I'm delighted, and can I say this personally, extremely pleased that he has taken on board what I've said, and in my 22 years on the City Council, I have never, I think, ever said that, and so I congratulate him.
Very good. Thank you very much. On that contented note, Councillor Roberts.